All right, guys, let's start off here on number 1. So this one, it gives us the diagram here. It does have a description up top, but that's really just matching the diagram. It says, what's the distance from the base of the building to the base of the tree? So we're trying to find this distance right there. And how I would do this is I would split this up into 2 smaller pieces that I would call X and Y, and I would solve those individually. It looks like both of those can be solved with a tangent. So I would say for X, I would say tan 36 equals 254 over x. And so if I multiplied the x over, it would say x times tan 36 equals 254. And then divide that tan 36 over to the other side. And that would give you x. And then we're really going to do the same thing for y. And then ultimately our answer for this is going to be x plus y is the red distance there. You can see that they need to be added together. All right, next up, number 2 here. It says we're standing on top of the lighthouse and the boat is approaching the shore. So I'll just draw this as our lighthouse. I'll label it L. And then we have the boat is approaching the shore, so I'll draw the boat over here. I'll draw a right triangle. It says the angle of depression is 41 degrees. So the big one on this one is that angle of depression is technically up here. Because it must be created with a horizontal line. So whenever I'm doing angle of depression from like the top down, I always just label it as the angle of elevation from the bottom back up. And you kind of always be right if you do that, whether it's angle of elevation or depression. If you put it in that bottom corner with a horizontal line, you'll always be correct. And so the it says the boat is 250 feet away from the base of the lighthouse, and we want to know the lighthouse height. So I would use a tangent there. So I'm going to say tangent of 41 equals x over 250, opposite over adjacent. So we'll multiply that 250 over, and that's it. All right, next up here, number 3, it says a lamppost casts a shadow on the ground. The shadow is 18 feet long, and the lamppost is 13. Yeah, I'm going to underline that. There you go, 13 feet tall. So we know that the lamppost is 13 feet tall, and then the shadow is 18 feet long, and they want the angle of elevation of the sun. Some of you may be thinking, what does the sun have to do with this? Well, remember that the sun creates the shadow, so the sun would have to be like over here, creating the shadow. And so you could see that that angle of elevation kind of extends out there. It's still that angle that we're looking at right there. So what I would do here is I would set up a tangent. So I'm going to say tangent of theta, which I don't know, equals 13 over 18. And then we always get rid of this tangent to find the angle using tan inverse. And so theta equals tan inverse of 13 over 18. All right, next up here, it says sine of d equals cosine of e, then d and e must be what type of angles. Now, the kind of formula that we learn for this is that sine of any angle, I'll call alpha, equals cosine of 90 minus that angle. And so if I kind of evaluate these angles here, which is really what's going on here, what do alpha and 90 minus alpha add up to? Well, they actually add up to 90. And so if these two add up, kind of visualize it here, adds up to 90, then that means they are complementary. That is the definition of complementary, is that they add up to 90. All right, next up here, this one says the equation 8 times tan 56 correctly determines the length of x, and which of the following. So I would just kind of set all these up. So for the first one here, I would say tan of 56. So tan 56 equals, and that would be 8 over x. And so if I multiplied the x over and then divided the tan back over, that would say that x equals 8 over tan 56. That is not what they're looking for here. So I'm actually going to cross off option A. Option B would actually be, what would that be? Oh, this is the hypotenuse. And so that would be sine of 56 equals x over 8, which would make x equal 8 times sine of 56. So that's not what they're looking for either. Once again, we're looking for this 8 times tan 56. C and D look like they don't have a 56. However, remember that if this angle is 36, we can do 90 minus that to get the other angle. So actually, in both of these cases, the other angle is 56. So you want to be looking at it from the other angle. and decide from that whether it is C or D. Which one ends you up with that 8 times tan 56 that we're looking for? So I'll let you guys decide between C and D. All right, next up, number 6. So this one, they want the ratio of tan of alpha, or sorry, they just call it A, as a with a rationalized denominator. So tan would be opposite over adjacent, which is over here. So that's going to be 7 over 4 rad 2. Now, normally we're allowed to leave that radical in the denominator, but since this is a multiple choice and they specifically asked for it, we will go ahead and multiply by rad 2 over rad 2 to rationalize the denominator. So it becomes 7 rad 2 over 4 times 2, since rad 2 times rad 2 is just regular 2. And so that's going to be 7 rad 2 over 8. All right, next up here, it gives us the 40 degrees right here, and then it gives us two sides, not numbers, but it does give us in terms of x, so I think we can still do this. It looks like they gave us the adjacent side and the hypotenuse, so I would use cosine. So cosine of 40 equals x over, oh no, it doesn't, equals x minus 4 over x. And so then I would multiply the x over to the other side, so x times cosine of 40 equals x minus 4. From there, I would probably just switch this cosine 40 into a decimal to make it a little easier to work with. And so I'm going to say this is 0.7660x equals x minus 4. And then this is just a linear equation, so I'm going to subtract x from both sides. Subtract 1x if you want to think of it like that. And so that becomes negative 4 on the right, obviously, and the left side is 0.7660 minus 1, so that's negative 0.234x. And so some of you may be thinking here that it doesn't make sense for x to be negative. I actually agree with that, but you can see that when we divide by the negative 0.234, it will turn out negative, so I'll let you guys do that on your own. All right, next up here, they're asking us which pair of trigonometric values are equivalent. So this is kind of the new thing we learned is that, like I mentioned kind of earlier, cosine, actually I'll do it as sine of any angle is always equal to cosine of 90 minus that angle. So if the angles add up to 90, then that means that the sine will equal the cosine. So it's not when the angles are equal, so A is definitely incorrect. And so 65 plus 25, that's 90, right? Yes, it is. And so this one is going to be our correct answer. This one, they do add up to 90, but you can see it's a sine with a sine. So if it's sine and sine, they should actually be the same. If it's sine and cosine, they should add up to 90. So that's why C is incorrect. And then kind of same thing for D there. All right, next up here, we're trying to figure out this height. Once again, you could read it if you want, but they really did a good job setting up the diagram here. So if 82 is that whole angle, so I can't use SOHCAHTOA on this small triangle, but I do know two sides on the small triangle, so I can use Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to call this y, and then I'm going to say 50 squared equals 14 squared plus y squared. And then I'm going to go ahead and just subtract 14 squared from both sides, and I'm going to type it in my calculator like that. So this will say y squared equals 2304. And the square root of 2304 is 48. And so I know that this side is 48. And so with that, now I can kind of look at, because I was kind of first looking at this small triangle right here, but now I can really look at the big triangle since that 48 is actually included in both. And now I can use what? I can use tangent here. So tangent of 82, since that's the angle right here for the big blue triangle, is x, which is the answer to my question, over that newly found side of 48, which is the adjacent side. So I'll let you guys solve that. All right, next up here, it says we got an angle of elevation problem here. And so we're trying to find the height. I would call this little piece here x, and we can do tan of 35 equals x over 40, since this distance is the same 40 as it is below. And that'll allow us to find x. And since this distance right here is 5, which is the same as the person's eye level height, our final answer for this question is really going to be whatever we get for x plus 5. We have to add those up. All right, next up here, they want this measurement of the angle. So it looks like they gave me opposite and adjacent, so I would use a tangent. So I'm going to say tangent of, I'll call it theta, whatever you want to call it, equals 27 over 38. And so to solve that, we need to use the tan inverse. So I'll do tan inverse on both sides, and theta equals whatever is tan inverse of 27 over 38. All right, next up we got number 12 here. So for this one, what does it say? The Eiffel Tower is 1,063 feet tall, and they say, let's see, this is 30, and then this is 60. Okay, and then how far did he walk? So they're asking for this distance right here. Okay, so what I would do in this case is I would actually find some other distances here. I would find this one, I would call it y, and I actually need to find this big distance here, which I will call z. And then our eventual answer here is going to be z minus y. Actually, let me do that in red since it represents x. So x is going to equal whatever we get for z minus whatever we get for y. So if we're looking at z, we're kind of looking at the big triangle here. So I would say that tangent of z, nope, that's not it. Tangent of 30 equals 1063 over z. And tangent of 60 equals 1063 over y. That's looking at kind of this smaller triangle here. So you need to solve both of those for y and z, and then subtract them to get your distance for x. All right, next up here, we got the ladder here, and then it's 16 feet high. And so I think we want to find, let's see, all the equations that could be used to solve for x. So the one I see right off the bat is sine of x equals 16 over 20 could be used. Now we would have to do the sine inverse to find that, but that could be used to find it. Now there's going to be more than one because it does say select all that applies. So what we're going to need to do is Pythagorean to get this last side. Since we have two of them, we could do 20 squared equals 16 squared plus, we'll call it, I don't know, y squared. And so if I do 20 squared minus 16 squared, that equals 144. And so y equals 12. And so that's where all those 12s are coming from below. And so we know that we can do tangent would be 16 over 12. Do they have that? No, they don't. But we could also do cosine of x equals 12 over 20. So it looks like they do have that. So I would say for that one, it's going to be B and D. All right, next up here, they want the length of RT, that's x, and they don't tell us what r is, but they say cosine r equals 0.6. That doesn't mean that r is 0.6, so here's what I would do. I'm just going to set this up. So cosine of r equals 12 over x, and then since they tell me this piece of information, I'm just going to substitute this whole cosine r, change it into 0.6. Since they told me cosine r equals 0.6, I can substitute that. So that means that 0.6x equals 12. And if I divide that by 0.6, that'll give me my answer. All right, next up here, they want the height of the shorter building. You can see right here. Let me do that in a different color. You can see it right here. And so I would kind of see that as being the same thing over here. I noticed, first of all the answers have kind of 50 minus something. And so what that's telling me is that we're going to take this whole 50 over on this side, and we're just going to subtract out this little piece right here. So I need to figure out what that piece is. I know that this is 200, so to me it looks like I would set up tangent of 8 equals, I'll call it x, because it's not really the height, it's this little x right here. So x over 200, opposite over adjacent. And so that means that x equals 200 times tangent of 8. And if I subtracted that value from 50, that would give me the height of the other building. So that looks like D. All right, next up here, we're going to identify the value that is equal to cosine of 27. So we learned that we can always switch this to sine by doing 90 minus whatever was inside before. All right, next up here, it says Marcos find a kite. It's a 204-foot long string, and he's holding it 4 feet above ground level. So you can see here, he's holding the kite, and then here's the string, here's the kite, and it's 204 feet long. Angle of elevation is 48 degrees, and then this distance right here is 4. So we're going to find this distance over here, and our eventual answer is going to be x plus 4. In this case, because they gave me the string, that's actually going to be a sine of 48, since this is the hypotenuse now, equals x over 204. So we'll use that to find x, and then add 4 to it to get our answer. All right, next up here, it says the ramp pictured as a slope of 1 over 10. So we kind of know here that slope is rise over run. So I'm going to label those as 1 and 10 respectively, just kind of remembering what I know about slope. And then it looks like I do need to find that hypotenuse. So I'm going to say 10 squared plus 1 squared equals c squared. So it's 101 equals c squared. So I'm going to call this the square root of 101. And so A would be wrong because that it needs to be 1 over 101, so B is correct. C is also correct because that's cosine, so it's adjacent. D is incorrect. There's nothing that's rad 99. Tangent equals 10. No, it's got to be tangent equals 1 over 10. Cotangent would actually equal 10. Once again here, this doesn't solve it for theta, but it's saying what could we use to solve for theta. And so on all of those, I would need to do the inverse, but it's just saying how would I set it up. All right, next up here we got a triangle, and it says wooden sticks are used to outline the perimeter. So how many inches of wooden stick would be required? So we need to really find this distance right there. It's not going to be our answer to this question, but we need to find it. So I would use Pythagorean theorem first on this triangle over here. And so that would be 13 squared equals 5 squared plus, we'll call it b squared. 169 equals 25 plus b squared. B squared equals 44. Sorry, 144. So this one is 12. Some of you may have recognized that as the 5, 12, 13 right triangle. If you did, that's fine. If not, you can always use Pythagorean theorem. Now I'll kind of move over to the right-hand side, although that side is still 12. Now I know that 15 squared plus 12 squared equals x squared. Wait, that's not right. 15 is hypotenuse, so it's 15 squared equals 12 squared plus x squared. That is better. Okay, so let's see. 15 squared minus 12 squared is 81 equals y squared. No, x squared. So obviously x equals 9. And so x is not our answer, though, because our answer is the perimeter. So it's all around the outside, 13 plus 15 plus 9 plus 5. Okay, next up here, we have cosine of A. And so that's really kind of saying to me cosine of x. And so what we know about this is that we can always switch this into sine by saying sine of the other angle. And so that would actually be sine of y. If you kind of think about here, cosine of x, if I labeled this as, let's label it, I don't know, I want to use a different letter here. So let's use G, H, and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I don't know. Then cosine of x degrees, you could see, would be G over I, according to how I drew this. And sine of y would equal that same G over I again. Furthermore, to switch this cosine into a sine, we can always do 90 minus whatever angle that was. So I could do it like that as well. So I think that's going to be all of my answers here. So sine of 90 minus x, and then sine of y, and then cosine of x is not there. Oh, but you know what will work also is sine of y I could turn into cosine of 90 minus y. Once again, just using that same rule, so D is also an option. All right, next up here, we got the picture is drawn for us, and they do say here is the height of the cell phone tower is 180 feet, so I could put that there. And so they're asking how I could find that distance right here. 7 foot, okay. So a couple ways we could do this. Oh, they're asking us what's correct. Okay, cool. So I'm going to cross off A. It's like a Pythagorean theorem, but these would need to be switched if it was a true Pythagorean theorem because 400 is the hypotenuse. So that one's no good there. Next up, they're talking about x here. So I would say sine of x equals 180 over 400. So that makes sense to me that the inverse would be equal to x at 180 over 400. All right, and then sine inverse of y equals sine inverse of 400 over n. Well, I would check that out. Sine of y is n over 400. So if I did the inverse, it would still be n over 400. So I'm going to say that's not correct. Cosine, or sorry, y equals cosine inverse of 180 over 400. Let's check that out. So cosine of y is 180 over 400. So if I did the inverse on that, that would work out. And then tangent of x would be 180 over n. So if I'd inverse that, that would work. And then n squared equals 400 squared minus 180 squared. This would work because this is our Pythagorean theorem. 400 squared equals n squared plus 180 squared, except they subtracted the 180 squared over to the other side. All right, next up here, it says that they're making a metal part here, and they want the area. So area on a triangle is 1/2 base times height. However, base and height must be perpendicular, so it's got to be this distance and that distance. And so I need to find those first, so I'm going to be using sine and cosine for that. So I'm going to say sine of 25 equals h over 10, and I'm going to say cosine of 25 equals b over 10. So I'll use that to find h and b, and then plug them into that since it's ultimately asking for the area. All right, next up here we got a diagram, and they want to know how tall the mountain is. And so how I would do this one is I would actually set up a new variable called y here. And so I would say tangent of 11 equals x over y. And I would also say that tangent of 3.5 equals x over 15 plus y. And so that, if you'd like me to color code it here, so this one I'll think of as this big green triangle. And so the opposite is x from 3.5, and the adjacent is 15 plus y, or y plus 15. And then this one right here, tan 11 equals x over y, is this blue triangle. Okay, so ultimately I'm looking for x here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this as a system of equations. I'm going to isolate x in both of these. So I'm going to say y times tangent of 11 equals x. And then over here, I'm going to say, let's see, 15 plus y times tan of 3.5 equals x. So now I'm going to do substitution. Since x is equal to this, I'm going to swap it out right there. I'm also going to get decimals for this. So I'm going to do tan 11, and I'm going to call this 0.1944 y equals, and then tan of 3.5. I'm going to call this one 0.0612y, and then if I multiply that by 15, it's going to give me 0.9174. Okay, so now I'm going to get all my y's to one side, so I'm going to subtract 0.0612y from each side. Is 0.1332y equals 0.9174. And now we'll do 0.9174 divided by 0.1332. And that gives me y equals 6.8874. Okay, now y is not the answer to my question. So I need to plug that back in to this equation back here. I could really use any equation, but that one looks pretty easy. So that means that x equals 6.8874 times tangent of 11. And so that's going to give me 1.33, we'll call it 88. Okay. And so since I've been rounding along the way, I'm going to say the answer is B here, because that's kind of the closest one to it. If that looks like a pretty small distance for a mile, or sorry, for a mountain, just remember that it is in miles. So it's like, I don't know, probably about 7,000 feet tall, because it's 1.34 miles. All right, next up here, it says you roll a six-sided number cube. What's the probability of you roll a number less than 4 or an even number? So or in probability is kind of always adding. So rolling a number less than 4, well, that's 3 out of 6. And then rolling an even number is also 3 out of 6 because kind of there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. However, on this one, there is some overlap here. There is kind of one number that I answered I counted twice. That number is 2. You can see that is less than 4, and it's an even number. So I counted it in both of those. So the way we fix that is just subtracting it back out. All right, next up here, they're predicting 42% chance of rain on Saturday, 54% on Sunday. So what's the probability that it will not rain both days? So since it's both days, it's going to be a multiplication since we need both of these to happen. But since it's a not problem, I have to subtract both of these from 1 or from 100%. And so this one's going to be a 58, and then this one's going to be a 46%. So since it has that word not there, we got to subtract those from 1 before we multiply. All right, next up here, it's saying the points of intersection. So it's just asking us to solve this system. So I would do some substitution there. So 3x squared equals 5x minus 2. I would get one side to 0 by moving everything over, and then I would factor. So my technique is I put a times c up here and b down there. So a times c is going to be 6 and b is negative 5. So two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to negative 5. This one's always tricky. Is it negative 2, negative 3? Let me double check here. Is it negative 2 times negative 3? Yes. Negative 2 plus negative 3? Yes. Okay. Now that means this is how I have to split this up right here. So I'm going to do it negative 2x and negative 3x, which comes from here. These guys I'm just going to bring down, and then I use factor by grouping here. So the first group looks like I can just take out an x. The second group, it looks like I can't take out anything, but since that first one's negative, I'm going to take out a negative 1, which changes the signs inside. So then I get x minus 1 for the stuff that's outside, and then 3x minus 2 for the stuff that's inside equal to 0. So now I'm going to set those equal to 0 and solve. So this one, x minus 1 equals 0, means that x equals 1. 3x minus 2 equals 0, which means 3x equals 2, and x equals 2 over 3. Awesome. I'm going to plug these back in here. I'll go ahead and plug it into the y equals x squared, so y equals 1 squared, which is obviously 1. So that'll be 1 comma 1. And then this one, this was x. So y equals 2 over 3 squared. And I can just square the top and the bottom there and get 4 over 9. So that's going to be 2 over 3, comma 4 over 9. All right, next up here, number 27. So for this one, whenever you have x squared and y squared adding together on the same side, that's always a circle. And if there's nothing, if it's not like x minus h or y minus k, it's always centered at the origin, which all of these are. And this one represents the radius squared. And so this tells me that the radius is actually radical 5, which is kind of about, I don't know, 2 point something. I would say it's probably about 2.3 or so. So I would just try to find that for the circle. And then for the other one, looks linear. So I would just get into y equals mx plus b. So negative y equals negative x minus 1. So then y equals a positive x plus 1. So I'm looking for that y-intercept of positive 1 and a slope of positive 1 as well. So that's what you're looking for on these graphs. All right, next up here, we'll do number 28. So for this one, it says, what's the probability that randomly selected student has a job given that the person is less than 18 years old? So whenever it has that given there, we're only looking at the people that are less than 18 years old. So our denominator is going to be the total there, which is, they already added up for us, is 265. And so the numerator then is the people that have a job, so it's going to be the 25 there. So it looks like they went ahead and reduced that, so you can just do the same thing. Okay, next up here, it says we got this sequence here on number 29. So they listed out the terms as negative 12, negative 5, 2, and 9. So it looks like we're just adding 7 every time. And so I first kind of noticed that this is C here, f of n minus 1. So that's saying this is like the recursive form, saying it's plus 7. All right. All right, and so if it's a +7 pattern, it's not going to be exponential, so I'll cross off D. E looks correct as well. I would just kind of test it out. So what would happen if I plugged in a 2 here, +7 times, actually I'll plug in a 3, so I'll make that 3 minus 1. What does that give me? So that's -12 plus 7 times 2. So that would be +2, which would be my third term, should be +2, which it is. So I think this one's good as well. And then f of 5 would be 16. So if I added 7 again, would that give me 16? And yes, it would. And then f of 8 would be 9. That is not going to work here. If I continue this pattern, f of 4 is already 9, so it's not going to go back to 9 if I keep adding 7. All right, last two here, kind of no work required, but this one says that the mean is greater than the median, and so that is going to be skewed right is what we're looking for. Remember, the skew kind of always pulls the median in that direction, so you want to look for the one that's skewed right. And then lastly, number 31 here, the comparing the standard deviation. So although they have the same range here, you can definitely see that most of the data on this one is concentrated in the middle, whereas most of the data on this one is concentrated on the outside. So with that, I'm going to say this one has a greater standard deviation because it's more spread out, and B is more compact.